All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. This week's guest, Miguel Sternberg, Spooky Squid Games, creator of
Hello.
They Bleed Pixels and Russian Subway Dogs. How you doing, dude? Toronto luminary. What else? What other tags can I throw on here? Um, long time associate. We way back. You were one of
Early
the
days of
yeah,
Toronto
very pretty.
indie dev community.
Yeah, how you doing?
Pretty good. Like,
Pretty.
trapped in my house, but that's game development also.
Yes. Yeah, so the chat is kind of excited that you are here. This is the first week, as I said a bit off stream. This is the first week I've actually taken to playing our guests' games in the mornings, and people have been watching me play both They Bleed Pixels and Russian Subway Dogs, and
Nice.
dealing with the I'd say punishing but fair gameplay that you have developed. And it's a good experience. But for I guess anybody new coming, do you want to like give a quick rundown of what both games are so that we have a frame of reference?
Okay.
Because it's just talking heads.
So They Bleed Pixels is a precision platformer slash 'em up, where you play a little girl with claws. It's got sort of like a cute but Lovecraft kind of vibe. Um, and has a one-button combat system where it's all sort of like the timing and direction of button pushes changes what you do. I'd compare it sort of to like a really stripped-down version of like how Smash Brothers controls its fighting, or Nidhogg, which was the actual inspiration for the combat system. And then it also has a checkpoint system where you have to sort of earn your checkpoints through combat. So the fancier your kills, the faster it fills this meter. And once the meter is filled, you can drop a checkpoint anywhere you want. And then Russian Subway Dogs is a systemic arcade game inspired by the real life stray dogs of the Moscow Metro.
Right.
So there's these actual.
I've heard this story. For
There are real dogs that a wolf scientist discovered while studying the stray dogs in Moscow, because he didn't have to leave the city. That had learned to sort of commute from like the suburbs where it was sort of safe to find places to sleep to the downtown where they could steal food easily. And that was the inspiration for the game. And it's a systemic arcade game because it kind of like combines fairly classic arcade gameplay with some of the sort of system stuff that is in something like Breath of the Wild, where you can like cook your food using vodka explosions. And then there are power-ups in it, but the power-ups will work for you, but also for any of the other animals that are on the subway platform.
it's one of
Sort of a lot of little hidden depth for
yeah.
players to discover.
So it's one of the very interesting things I've found about the game. Like when you look at it at surface value, you don't really get that in the tell. But as you pour into the game, like every single mechanic interacts with every single other mechanic, and it comes together to like create a series of levels where there's like always new shit happening, and that's really cool. For example, for people who haven't seen the game or the gameplay, you'll have a big part of the game is you're a dog. You sneak up behind passengers on the subway. You bark. They throw their food in the air. You can like juggle it and eat it. There's like guys with hot sauce, right? You catch the hot sauce, you start breathing fire. But if you knock the hot sauce into like an elk that's charging through the station, it'll turn on fire and start cooking all of the food and stuff around. Every little thing mashing together, it's almost like a perfect, you have all these ingredients to sandwich, and you can slap any amount of the ingredients together to make a sandwich, and it's all a unique flavor profile. And that's kind of like how I feel about the levels in Russian Subway Dogs, which is a lot of fun and a really great approach to design. So
Yeah, no,
kudos.
I'm like weirdly influenced in my design from stuff like the old Looking Glass, like Thief and stuff like that, which had just a few rules, but all of those rules came together in complex ways.
Right.
But I can't afford to make Thief with like we're usually the teams are usually around 3 people, like 2 core people and a musician. So trying to sort of take those influences and put them into genres that I can achieve with my sort of skill set and the size of the team. Did you play any of the endless mode of Russian Subway Dogs?
No, I was trying so hard to beat the game before this interview, and I made it to the end of the orange line. Is that and then the black line showed up, and I was like, "Oh God!"
Yeah.
And that was like the end of our stream this morning. It was very punishing to try and unlock it, but so I was trying to finish that before I got to the endless mode. But do tell.
So we actually the endless mode is a thing that I worked on through most of development.
Really?
And so all of those little elements and such were built for the endless mode.
Interesting.
And then from that, it was like, okay, how do we break this up? And a lot of that was Alina Sechkin, who was the artist on it. She did a lot of the sort of first drafts of levels. We just made a big list of like, what if we did something that was all about like elks and shoppers? What does that look like?
Yeah. Because so like one of the things is like I mean, when you get down to it, I'd say there's probably like, you know, maybe 2 handfuls worth of mechanics in there, but it's like so much better to use those few numbers of the few mechanics and use them in a lot of different ways rather than, you know, here's a new weapon and it like does this one thing and that's it, right? Like there's very little utility out of that for design, and as a small studio I applaud leveraging all that, but I had no idea that the endless mode was the focus because and maybe this is just something I'm picking up on playing They Bleed Pixels and Russian Subway Dogs sort of like back to back and together, but Pixels had a lot of mechanics as well, right? And one of the things that I noticed playing it again this time, like I mean I played it back with 2013, 2014, yeah. and then I'm picking it up again. And by the way, I'm like way worse at the game now. I have no idea what happened to my skills. But it has so many mechanics right out in that first level. And this is one of the things where I noticed a design evolution. So with They Bleed Pixels, you come out of the gate with you know, all of the movement like mechanics. There's dashing, there's double jumping, there's wall sliding, there's all the different ways of hitting, you know, the stabbing and then kicking and then launching into the air and then environmental damage, and that's all like in the first level, and it's like right there. Yeah. And then I notice in Russian Subway Dogs, it has that level of density in the game, but it's just so methodically paced out that I thought it was like the core focus of the game. So it's really surprising to hear that the endless mode was where it started. But like, I mean, did you think about that sort of thing at all?
Like I kind of knew what the single player was going to be during the entire development. Like it started, so like just historically, it started in 2012 before They Bleed Pixels was out. Wow. It was a jam game. So there's a jam game version of Russian Subway Dogs that is just the very basics. It's like the poodles, I think, were in there. The vodka juggling is in there. The grabbing food in air, the basic combo systems are there. But nothing else. And I sort of knew that was fun from the jam game. Right. It's fun to juggle vodka. It's fun to catch food in the air. But then when I was thinking like, okay, how do I build this out into like a full experience? I was like, okay, there's certain things I can't do because they ruin the core of the game. They ruin that, like the fun of juggling and catching. And so a lot of it then was like, okay, it's got to be lots of things that interact with each other in interesting ways while still keeping that same basic move set. So I think part of it is just it naturally came out of the fact that the moveset is very, very simple for that game. All of the depth comes from the things you can juggle and how they interact.
Yeah, because I very, very seldom do I think of, like, when I play Pixels, I very much am that character and I'm focused on the character and what I'm doing with the character, versus with Dogs, I'm the stage, you know? Like
Yeah.
I'm less focused on like my individual minutia of like, am I here, am I there, and more like, okay, I see this, and I'm like trying to orchestrate the whole situation to do what I want to get these or challenges done, so I can get the bones, so I can get to the next level.
Yeah, no, you have to sort of be aware of it. If you're playing the endless mode, you also have to be sort of like, okay, I could get rid of this food now, but do I need it right now?
Right.
You've got to sort of like maintaining the state of the platform as you're playing through and thinking about where you're going to be in like 15 seconds, in 30 seconds. What do you want to keep around? What do you want to get rid of? What's a threat?
Right.
That's one of the advantages of a single screen game, is that you can have this sort of situational awareness of the entire state of the game at that exact moment.
Yeah, it's a satisfying feeling when you finally get everything going the way you want it to, and it's a devastating feeling when you get everything going the way you want it to, and then you still happen to die just before the end, or you get the F grade and the doors stay shut, and that's the punishment that drives you happy crazy. But wow, to hear so 2012 to 2018, that's a lot of development time, and no shade on my game, I took 6 years on mine too. It's what happens with small teams.
It was a side project. It was something I'd poke at like when I was on vacation. I just had it on my laptop and I'd try different things with it.
Right.
And then we had a project in between They Bleed Pixels and Russian Subway Dogs we worked on for about a year and a half, 2 years, that we had to shelve because it was just very ambitious, wasn't quite coming together, and we weren't able to get sort of the extra funding we'd need to really make it good.
Right.
And so at that point I was like, okay, what do I have sort of in my backlog that could be the next thing? And Russian Subway Dogs was already pretty far along. I had like a good plan of like, these are the things I can add that'll add depth and interest to this.
So what's it like? Because I've only ever built like narrative games where I know everything about it, and I imagine that when building a platformer like Pixels, there's some level of that I know how to beat this level that comes in, and it like diminishes that like play joy that you get when playtesting. But with a game that's designed around like an endless concept like Subway Dogs, like how do you like just consistently enjoy playing it? Like how does that change? How did your playing experience with the game change from Pixels to Subway Dogs?
I think like both games, if I'm testing something, I will often end up playing more than I mean to, which is always
Right.
a good sign in an action game. I definitely think that like the nice thing about when you're playing an endless game is that you are trying to design for the experience that you are having as the developer. You are trying to keep it fresh for a long time, for a lot of replays. I think it's similar if you're making like a roguelike, anything like that, where replay is the way most people will be experiencing it. Optimizing for your own enjoyment often ends up being optimizing for the player's enjoyment as well.
Right.
So I'd be playing and be like, oh, this is like getting a little bit stale. It needs something that changes the rhythm up. Or what can I add that would like make the rhythm more interesting here? Get more variation. Make each play feel like fresh and interesting and engaging. So you just want to do that one more time thing.
Right. It's interesting to do. I'm looking forward to the day when I finally actually step out of my little bubble and start making something that I can enjoy playing endlessly for those reasons. You have recently finished a very big porting job. You want to talk a little bit about that process, especially working on like what is it? They Blue Pixels is a 2012 game. Wow, it's older. It's older than I thought.
Yeah, it's 8 years old.
Wow. But I mean, wow. I mean, what an age to live in when like we passed that threshold now where like a game needs to be new to be enjoyed. and I'm so glad that the gaming culture has kind of like superseded that, and like people are have this, 20 years plus of games that they were starting to enjoy, rather than just like always what's new. But what was the process like, going back into the pixel world?
Just to comment on that, just to sideline things for a moment. Have you ever gone back and read like a review of a pixel art game from like early 2000s? Because the reviews are more dated than the games are.
Really?
Like there's all of this stuff about like how the the art's really dated, and like now it'd be like, oh no, this is fine. Like people just accept it.
That's wild.
Same with also like reading roguelike reviews from that time. Where it's like, oh, there's a lot of like old school stuff. Like if it's like a review of like a mystery dungeon game or something.
Right, like some ancient Spelunky review. That's like, yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting the way that like that time period feels incredibly dated because of how actually behind the times the reviewers were when they thought they were sort of at the like bleeding edge. So yeah, I definitely like agree with you. It's like we're in a good time in terms of people accepting a really wide range of types of games and types of videos.
To stay on the topic for a second, like, do you think that is just because like the player base has boomed so much that like, the audience size that is willing to accept pixel games or text heavy games or whatever, a AAA journalist would have poo-pooed 10 years ago, or is there something else that you think is contributing to this grander acceptance of genres and styles?
I think part of it is sort of a player literacy. Okay. That the same way that like an experimental film that comes out too early, people will be like, what is this? And then 10 years later, people will be like, oh no, like now understanding where that genre was going to go and all this other stuff, it's now feels much more mainstream. I think of like a game like Majora's Mask, which was generally like seen as this like weird oddball Zelda that nobody really liked, and now is like considered to be sort of this brilliant entry in the series.
Right.
I think there's just a general literacy that has gone up as more types of games are made. People are playing more. I think there's also just like more information out about like game design and ways of thinking about games.
Yeah, to the point about like Majora's Mask, though, it almost feels like eventually everything old and bad comes in vogue. Eventually, right? Like we have a whole swath of people now who seem to think that the Star Wars prequels are the best films in the series, and I remember being there when they were the worst thing on the planet.
Yeah.
And so I wonder like if it's a generational turnover that's causing a lot of like acceptance for things that people had previously dismissed or what as well, if that's a factor.
I don't know, like I did not own an N64 at the time that Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time came out, and I've tried to play Ocarina of Time like 4 or 5 times and just like bounced hard off of it.
Right.
And I immediately got into Majora's Mask. I think it is actually the better of the two games.
Any reason? I haven't played either.
Its concept is more interesting.
Gotcha.
It's trying to do weirder, more interesting things. But also, I actually think its pacing is better. The beginning of Ocarina of Time is slow and kind of dull.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's pretty typical. It's I mean I've also bounced probably 4 or 5 times off of Ocarina myself. It's just a slow gain of equipment and powers and all such. So on this topic then, when you went back to Pixels, did you change anything?
No, like the goal here was basically I wasn't the one doing the actual physical porting. I was doing testing. I was fixing up some of the graphics that needed to be revised for for this version because you can't have some of the same artwork for like controllers and such on the Switch. The actual port was done by Ethan Lee, who does a lot of indie game ports for Mac and Linux as well.
Gotcha.
And the goal was just like, let's get as perfectly as we can reproduce it on the Switch, the original game. There's definitely like, when I look at it, it's an 8-year-old game for me. I've, made an entire full game and some half games in between. There's definitely things where I'm like, oh, this isn't quite to like my current design sensibilities. I tweak this way, I tweak this that way. Not usually any of the thing that players complain about. Generally the things that I just like feel like, oh, I would like tweak this way or that way. But the goal here was just like preserve the game as it existed.
Right.
The last sort of update it got.
Right on. No, I mean, that's I guess that's the way you want to do it. I mean, I like remasters to an extent, but there is something for keeping a game the way that it is, especially because like we've had discussions plenty of times about doing some sort of like remaster for Always Sometimes Monsters, and like the like bringing it up to the code of the newer game with its improved artwork and everything. And I kind of always decide against it because there's like, not to dredge up the soulless meme. It's like, it was made in its time. It is what it is, and it's been appreciated, semi-consistently over the last, 6+ years. Like, let it be what it is. There's no need to renovate things that are already working, no matter how much weird chink may be in it.
Well, it's like going to the Star Wars thing, the weird stuff that's been done to the original trilogy, where they're just like, okay, we've got to tweak this scene, tweak that scene, and like it messes with them as kind of historical documents of a specific time and like what the technology was to do the special effects, like those limitations are part of a piece of media or art or whatever.
Right.
They're kind of intrinsic to them in a way, and when you try to sort of sand those off, I don't know if it always benefits the work.
Are there any remasters that you've really applauded or have you really enjoyed? Sorry.
I absolutely love the Lizard Cube one of Wonder Boy: The Dragon's Trap.
Okay. Tell me about this. I know nothing.
Oh, okay. It's a French studio remaking a Japanese Master System game.
Okay.
Which for most people in North America is not a game from their childhood, but for me is, because I grew up with a Master System. And they didn't change any of the physics. It all works the same way with, I think, 1 or 2 bugs taken out as the original. But they did beautiful, like, hand-drawn animation over top of it. And in sort of a very sort of French style. And it really demonstrates how much animation changes the feel of a platformer. Like you can actually like hit a button and switch between the old pixel art and the new art. And there's all these extra sort of animation states that are in the remake.
Right.
That aren't in the original pixel art.
They go from just 3 frames to 12 or something, right? Yeah.
Well, it's not just that, but also like if you stop, you just slide without it changing your run animation in the original. But in this one, you slide the same amount, but it has this like beautiful like toning, slipping thing, and it totally changes how good the game feels to play without changing any of the underlying mechanics.
I mean, keeping the I guess for physics in as they were for They Bleed Pixels was probably a priority, I presume. I mean, what kind of port is this? Like, is it a lot of the original source code is going into the port, or is it really?
It is the original source code. Like it's basically it's just like a slight fork. Some of the improvements that were done, just bug fixes and such, between the two versions are now also live on the PC version.
Right.
So they're essentially the same game. There's a few things like the video source files had to be a little bit lower for the Switch because the Switch is not a video powerhouse.
Are you talking about the cutscene?
Yeah, the cutscenes,
right,
which are compressed like pixel art video.
And apologies, but is Russian Subway Dogs on Switch as well?
I'm in the middle of porting it to everything but Switch at the moment.
Everything but Switch.
And those I am doing the ports because I was the programmer on Russian Subway Dogs.
Right. I can't. Yeah, I can't imagine getting somebody else's code and having to port it. That's a wizardry in itself.
Yeah, no, and Russian Subway Dogs, it still has some of that old jam game code deep in it. So it's basically like not only, I guess when it came out, 6 years of code, but also 6 years of me getting to be a better like game maker coder. It's like there's some things where I'm using the right data structures for stuff, and other things where it's just like ugly brute force, like you're an artist coding.
Right. Yeah, I know that. I'm familiar with the style. But there's even when you want to renovate an entire project, there's always that like one critical like class or something that you have to keep exactly as it is, or the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, I try not to get too much into that trap of like the constant refactor.
Right.
It's like, is this like a small bit that doesn't affect anything else? It actually doesn't need to be perfect code. It just needs to run.
Right. Yeah, getting it done is better than getting it perfect. Yeah. So I wanted to talk a bit about the art as well for the games. Now, in addition to programming, you do a lot of the art for the games, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us a bit about your artistic journey in games? Like, where did you start dabbling, and then how did it evolve?
So way back late 90s, I had a friend who was doing Game Boy Color homebrew stuff. And so I started doing pixel art for him, sort of messing around with that. And shortly after that, I went to animation school, learned 3D animation, worked in film for a year, doing special effects. And then I was out of work for a year. And during that time, met up with some folks who formed Cappy. So I did some early, mostly unreleased J2ME cell phone games with Cappy.
Right, I forgot. That's a very early part of Cappy history. Is the
So, my first sort of pixel art, and then I started doing freelance pro pixel art work. Did a job for Nike for a shoe campaign that had a whole like video game component. LeBron James in the Chamber of Fear.
Interesting.
And from there, just like freelanced for many years, and then started Spooky Squid.
Do you remember the exact shoe?
Sorry?
Do you remember the exact shoe that it was for, by chance?
It was for the first LeBron James like branded shoes that they did.
Because I literally have.
Oh my god!
I think these are probably a newer one. I mean, I don't know how long the series runs for, but that's literally the only one I wear.
I think they reissued them recently. They did like a reissue retrospective type thing.
Right.
But yeah, that was actually like the game was actually only for the Asian market, so it didn't come out here. And they had some really cool TV ads. They had one of my favorite anime studios did like the TV ads, Studio 4C. So happy that like my first paid pixel art job was like for a campaign that involved a bunch of people I looked up to.
Right. So you started out off helping a friend with the Game Boy games. Then you're doing a bunch of different, getting contract work, freelance work here and there as you can. I assume you weren't working with an agency, right?
No, it's
yeah,
just
just
find jobs on the internet.
right. And
Pay.
when was the moment, I guess, that you realized that like you could do the art for yourself?
Well, all of these times I was doing the art. Like that was the
I
thing
mean,
that
for
I
your
was
own game.
for my own stuff. It was more sort of realizing that like tools like Game Maker existed and that I could be like making stuff, and that it was like finally sort of at the point where the hard shit was taken care of and most of the programming you were doing was actually the game design side of things and not like how do I blit this sprite to the screen properly. And so that was, I think, 2009-ish. I took part in Jim Monroe, local like author, game maker, had a thing called the Artsy Games Incubator. And a friend of mine, Rosemary Moscow, who does really cool bird comics, she took part in like one of the first ones of those, and then she introduced me to Jim, and he invited me to take part in the next one, and I did something called Night of the Cephalopods.
Right. I remember this.
For that.
It was a top-down or isometric perspective. I had a shotgun, and there were your trademark Squiddy people, right?
Yeah.
Am I remembering it?
And it did. It had live voice-acted commentary of what you were doing. It was basically doing like the Bastion thing, I think maybe 2 years before Bastion.
That's right.
But in a very small, compact scale. So like that got me into Game Maker, and at the same time, I met Andrew Pilkew, the programmer of They Bleed Pixels, at a freelance job that we were both doing at a local game company. And ended up going for a grant for a project that had to be canceled called Guerrilla Gardening Seeds of Revolution, which was a stealth militant gardening game where you overthrew a dictatorship through graffiti with plants.
Yeah.
One of those.
Great concept.
Hard to get funding for.
I mean, you talk about taking down governments, Hey, it just doesn't play in the capitalist world, man.
I think it was mostly that we wanted to make a weird hardcore stealth game with planting as the main mechanic.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I remember the game kicking around. God, 2015, 16? Is that the timeline?
No, that was like 2010, 2011.
Wow. Yeah, man. Then no, I mean, 10 years ago, like the industry was not willing to back weirder games. It just was not in vogue. I mean, we already talked plenty about like how much taste has changed, but
publishers were basically not paying for indie games at that point. They would like maybe take, if your game was finished, they'd be like, okay, we will do the marketing and take half the money.
Yep.
Was basically the state of indie game publishers at that time, and it's a very different world now. But also, like the year we were working on that, both Farmville and Plants vs. Zombie came out. So it went from like a weird concept that people didn't have any like preconceived notions of what a game with plants would be about to, oh, this has to be a casual game and probably on Facebook.
Oh man. That would.
So, yeah, we're making this game like heavily inspired by Metal Gear Solid, Jet Set Radio, and
I had a small dabble in the Facebook world, and man, yeah, like it was just not. It was that the market was not receptive to anything that wasn't a clone of the proven models. It's just it's a shame that sometimes great ideas, the industry's just not willing to pick them up at the time.
Yeah, no, I think it is different. I'm still like self-publishing everything, but I think quite possibly next game I may try working with a publisher, just because it is very hard to do everything with a very small team.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many moving parts in getting a game out.
Yeah, I mean, the publishing game has changed quite substantially. I'd say over the last 10 years. Like we got into a publishing agreement almost exclusively because we wanted to get on Steam, and way back when, it was not something very easy to do. This was pre Greenlight, and so that was a lot of what a publisher was earning their keep for, and that has since obviously diminished. Now everybody can just chuck their games up, and then like the marketing game has also kind of really changed over the last I'd say 3-4 years, to the point where I think publishers need to start offering more and better deals to developers, just because the capacity of what a publisher is capable of doing for you has changed so much. So I mean, I totally encourage great relationships with publishers, and with somebody with your track record for making quality games. I don't think it's going to be a hard time finding someone to shake hands with.
Like you talk about the marketing thing, it has been interesting to see like what the amount of work it would take to get a certain amount of noise online back in 2012 versus like what it takes now to get sort of the same amount of coverage.
Yeah.
It's become harder. I think that's partially it's become harder for games journalists to cover smaller things.
Yeah.
Because that market has also become much more competitive, but also just like the media landscape is just bad for journalism in general.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing. Like, we've talked about, had a couple guests have talked about this, but it's like the decline in how much a single review is worth. Like it used to be a good review on a big website could make your game, and now it's not really going to help all too much. Versus like you see something like what happened with Among Us and Twitch. It's just like somebody randomly plays the game and okay, now you have the most popular game of the year. Deal with it.
Yeah, no, and that sort of shows like how much weird like luck and happenstance and such is involved in success. Like the game didn't get much better this year when it suddenly blew up. It just like it didn't get the exposure it needed until this year.
Yep.
It was always a good game that people would want to play.
Yeah, it's one of the things we have a lot of conversations. Actually, we've had a lot of conversations up since the Among Us thing happened, and it's like, I've definitely been a proponent of like standing by your games forever. I hate being one of those. I haven't been, and I would probably never be able to be one of those people who releases a game. Here's 3 months of updates, and then okay, it's done. Bye. It's just not in my DNA. Because one of the things that kept the game, in the algorithm was that Interslot did update the game, over the course of those past 2 years. Not constantly with tons and tons of new content, but they didn't just leave it and let it die. Nap has a comment. He says a lot of customers still buy games because of a publisher name or a specific publisher name, and that's definitely true. I think.
There's definitely a way of it being like, oh, okay, there's a certain quality bar that I know I will get, and a certain sort of taste from this publisher.
Right. He says a good example of what I'm saying is when people talk about a game made by LJN, right, Notorious, while they were only publishing. Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. When you get a big publisher that buries the developer. Yeah, that's definitely true. Like speaking from my own inner circle experience, like with Devolver, like how many times they got emails being like, "Oh, you guys did a great job making Hotline Miami," and like to their credit, they always made sure to like correct people and like give developer credit where it's due, but it doesn't really seem to matter. When a publisher has 40 titles a year versus a developer's 2 at most,
Yeah.
right? Like their name is just going to be so much more prominent, and that's who's going to get the instinctive credit, even though not one of those people can touch code.
Yeah, no, there's the upside that you can sort of have their reputation help your game sell, but the downside that you aren't necessarily building your own reputation.
Right.
Um,
Unless your game tanks and then everybody blames you.
Yeah.
That's always the way. Okay, so let's see. We've talked Pixel. I want to get back on Subway Dogs for a little bit because I think out of the two, I honestly I love this game. I think if it was released in 1998 in the arcades, I think you would have redirected the entire course of the games industry easily. It is a very, very well made arcade experience. What has what was the release like for you, and how has it been, I guess, the past 2 years since it's been available on PC?
So it hasn't done anywhere near the numbers that They Bleed Pixels did, just being released in a different time. What is interesting is that like you are not the only person who has like come across it and been surprised in that way. There's a few people who've been like really hardcore fans of it. Often like other game developers. It's weird. Like right now, I think it's a hard time to get attention for arcade games.
Mm-hmm.
They sort of go in waves of popularity, and it's this sort of stretch that we're in right now. It's not really suitable for phones, and also like phones have managed to give everyone a handheld gaming device and then like monetize it in such a way that it ruins what sort of games can be put on it. So it's sort of a weird time to have put out what I think is like, I think one of the most interesting arcade games out there. I personally really, really am proud of the work that myself and Alina and Peter Chapman, the musician, put into it. But I don't think it's super found its audience because people weren't looking for a super deep arcade game when it came out. I'm hoping that when it comes out on console that it'll find more and more sort of the audience that I think would enjoy it.
Right. It's interesting that you bring up phone, because we actually did have this kind of conversation while I was playing it one morning about how it's really tough, apart from like slowing down the hunger meter. How would you ever make this game easier? Right? Like it's one of these things where it's like it is what it is. Like you can't really make things any easier than they are. Did you ever contemplate a mobile version?
Yeah, there's actually like if you search deep enough into my Twitter, you'll see some mock-ups of one where it had buttons below. It didn't have quite as high of a environment screen, which now wouldn't work because one of the things, I have to thank Alina for this, was just boosting the height of the physics. So like making your jump higher, or making stuff fly higher into the air. So now it needs all of that real estate, but at one point it didn't need that. And so I had sort of buttons mapped out underneath. But part of the problem is that like the game needs to be a very specific aspect ratio,
right?
Because of how the single screen mechanics work, and phones are just all over the place in terms of their aspect ratio, in terms of the resolution. They're not super well suited to single screen arcade games.
Right.
Whereas on console, we always know we've got 16:9.
Right.
It's just dependable.
Until the ultra-wide monitors start complaining. No, that's cool. Yeah. I don't know, man. There's a lot of love put in these games, and I really do appreciate other small studios just like going whole hog, adoring their own creations, um, and continuing to support them. They Bleed Pixels is getting a Switch release 8 years after its initial. Um, if you've got,
I was trying during those 8 years to make that happen.
right, I mean it's not easy. We are nearly through our first Switch release, and it is an interesting process to say the least. Yeah. Do you have any, I guess, like advice for people? Like a lot of the people watching our show are going to be heading into their first game jam, or a couple of the people are going to be heading into their first game jam. Some of them it's their second, starting next weekend. We're hosting a little game jam with our community, and considering the success of the design of Russian subway dogs, I'm curious to know if you have any advice for anybody who's joining our game jam.
I think like one thing is try to come up with sort of a series of features, all of which will be fun if you had to stop there. So you basically like you're gonna have a big plan that you're gonna think is really small. It's like this is what I can do in a weekend, and it's gonna be twice as big as you actually think. You've got like a 4-day plan, and you think you've got a 2-day plan. So try to sort of have a list of like, this is the first thing we're gonna get playable, and it'll be fun then. Okay, here's the next thing we're gonna add, and it'll be more fun. But if we aren't able to add it, it's still good. It'll still be good if we strip it back down. So sort of have a list of the features you're going to add, the order they're going to go in, and try to make sure that even the earliest version of it will be fun in some way to play. Right. Because you just don't know how many of those things you'll get in.
So using Subway Dogs as an example, then what was that first fun mechanic?
I think. So some of that, like this, the other thing is like leave room for improvisation. I think all I had as an idea was just the stealing food and hitting people with vodka part. The vodka juggling just came out of like, wait, this would be even more fun if I could do this during the thing. And then it's like, just with that, you've already got something playable. Then it's like, okay, I'll add rival dogs to steal your food. Okay, I'll add poodles that can jump. But like, even once you just have the hunger meter, food you can steal, and exploding vodka, you have a game.
Right. And how did you suss out those first mechanics though? Like, was it from hearing the story of these Russian dogs?
It was based on that story. So I was like, okay, what is the smallest game I can make with that story as the theme?
Right.
And then what are the things I can add to make it more fun? And then when it came to like making the big version of it, it was like, okay, here's a big list of things that I could add. And most of those made it in some form. But even then there was like improvisation. Did you get to the bit where there's the babushkas with the fish and snow?
Yeah.
Did you reach any bit of snow?
Yeah, dude.
The whole thing where you freeze fish in the snow happened like a month or two before launch, I think.
No way.
It was based on us playing. I was like, wait, what if you could do this?
Right.
And I got like a rough version of it working in like a weekend.
That's crazy because then you literally also have a level later on that's like, make sure you don't do this. And it's the level is designed around keeping the fish away from the snow or melting the snow before the fish hit. I mean,
So it may have not actually been. It may have been like a month or two before we basically locked stuff down and started working on the single player. I can't remember where we were. in development exactly. I just know that it was pretty late. Like it was not part of the design document at all.
Jake is pointing out that none of our game jams have ever been mechanic based, and everybody seems to just make really wonky half-ass stories. Sort of true.
Yeah, like I can only be considering like mechanics based games because that's the stuff that I make.
God, it's a talent I need to develop badly. We tried really hard. Like our last game jam, the theme was no words. Nobody's allowed to use words in their games. Still ended up having narrative games rather than mechanical stuff. But that's just the way it shakes. I mean, like I think there's there's something in the DNA of every designer, and with you clearly like classic arcade mechanics, precision, and brutal challenge is definitely in there. Do you know where that comes from?
So I like part of it is to me like what is interesting about mechanically complex games is engaging with its systems and learning them. And so if you want to get the most out of that, you end up making something difficult because you are slowly trying to teach the player everything about how the game works. And that in and of itself is going to end up being like intrinsically somewhat challenging. Because often when a game is easy, it's easy because it's not asking the player to internalize those systems completely. Right. It's sort of going like, you can kind of leave that system alone, or you can leave that system over there alone. Mm-hmm. Whereas usually I'm kind of going like, okay, I want you to sort of like to learn and understand this thing over time. It's not that I want to punish you. I'm not trying to be masochistic or sadistic. It's about the player learning and that process of mastery.
Have you ever had the difficulty? Sorry, go
on. What was I going to say?
I was going to say, have you ever had the experience at a trade show or a demo situation where people just aren't getting the mechanics? And how does that make you personally feel?
Usually I'm trying to figure out like what is going on inside their head that is making them have a problem, and is it something that I can solve? Is there something that I can change either about how the game works or more often about how I'm going to teach the game? Because often like the first thing we get is the game playing well when someone understands how it works. And so then the part of design after that, or sort of during that you're constantly working and iterating on, is how am I going to teach this so that players get to that point where they've got the level of mastery that I want them to have. So throughout Russian Subway Dogs and They Bleed Pixels, we went through iterating tutorials, iterating like how can we maybe change the graphics to teach things a bit better. It's like with the combo system in Russian Subway Dogs, a little bit after it was released, I actually did a patch that made larger point values have like fancier text that was larger, just so that someone, even if they weren't paying attention to what the numbers actually were, could see like, oh, it's gold and it's huge.
Right.
What I just ate was worth a lot of points. Right. So like it's often just like revising that, going like, we did a pass on the language just before it shipped where we're like, okay, we have too many things we call combos. What are other words we can use to describe this part of the game versus that part of the game? So we don't call like bouncing vodka multiple times a combo. We call it a juggle.
Right. Yeah, because there's the air combos, there's the juggle.
Yeah. We used to call them vodka combos as well. And I'm like, no, we can make this like, even the language you're using is a way of like teaching and moving the player towards being able to learn over time and comfortably. So it's like a huge refinement process throughout the entire development thing. And a big part of that is watching people at shows and seeing them fail to understand the game.
Yeah, it is one of the experiences one of the benefits. I mean, like, I never think that going to a show is particularly worth it for the marketing, but the live feedback from real human beings is kind of indispensable.
Yeah, you do need to like take into account that the way someone approaches a game at an event is not the same way that they approach it at home. So you've always got to be like filtering what you're seeing the same way that you filter player feedback in general. That often people will like, they'll know that they have a problem, they won't necessarily know what the solution is.
Right.
And so often it's trying to figure out like what they think is the problem, what is the actual solution as the game designer that you want to implement versus, you know, them going like, oh no, you need to jump twice as high.
I'm curious what are you are continuing to work on more new games? What's the situation with the future of developments?
Porting is keeping me pretty busy, but
Fair
like
enough.
I write notes on ideas, and I have sort of one big idea if I can get a lot of money
Right.
that I'd like to make, and then a smaller one. And always like, I don't like to make the same game twice. Like these things end up taking like 3 years of your life to make, and then 2 years after usually to support. So it's like, if I'm going to spend 5 years on something, I don't want to make They Bleed Pixels 2. I want to make Russian Subway Dogs. And after Russian Subway Dogs, I want to make something completely different as well. And like there's things that I'll borrow from each thing and take forward, but you've only got so many games you get to make in your life. So you've got to, like, I want to keep learning and keep making different things. So yeah, I've got one that's sort of a top-down Zelda-y type of thing, and I've got another one which is turn-based, roguelike inspired, sort of a remake, spiritual successor to a Japanese-only Game Boy roguelike from 1991, I think, called Cave Noir, that I fell in love with maybe a year ago. So I made a bunch of notes of like, oh, how would I like make a new one of these? Because I really like. It was doing a console roguelike before Mystery Dungeon by like a year or two. And so I had a bunch of really smart modern ideas in it that nobody went forward with. So looking at that, going like, oh, I kind of wish there was a sequel to this. Maybe I could make it.
Right. I mean, you never know what is going to be the answer to what you actually end up wanting to make next, until you're too late and you're already find yourself a year into it. You're like, wait a minute, how did I get here? Dude, it's been an absolute blast having you on the show. Is there anything you want to tell the people about They Bleed Pixels and Russian Subway Dogs before while I drop them the links to these hot, fresh games available on Steam on sale right now? Bam! There you go.
They're both on sale right now on Steam and on Itch and on Humble, and also it's 20% off for the Switch version of They Bleed Pixels right now, until Halloween on the eShop.
Spooky.
And no, this has been fun.
Good. Yeah, it's been great catching up, man. We haven't had a chance for a little while.
Yeah, no.
You know what with the, it's. I mean, I'm a hermit. I never show up then anyway. But it's nice getting a one-on-one time. You know, very rarely. You know, we often see each other passing at events and say hi. And this,
no, for sure.
Getting a chance to dive in,
nice, especially in this weird year where I don't see humans.
Hey, yeah, pleasure having you on, guys. Go check out the games. And follow Spooky Squid on Twitter to get more hot new updates. Check it out on Switch. Let's see. I'm gonna throw you guys to the thanks for watching. Tomorrow we will be. What day is it? Tomorrow's Friday. Tomorrow we'll be back. You know what? I am abandoning all schedule this week. We are going to go back and keep working on our stupid dedicated server for our multiplayer game. I'm giving up on working on anything else. Yeah. I'll catch you guys later. Thank you again for coming on, and I'll figure out with the raid in a second. I'll send you guys somewhere cool. Bye.